Hey everyone, my name is John. I am the founder of Whatifi, and in today's video I'm going to talk about large language models, how we're using them to parse complex financial what-if scenarios, and some of the limitations of large language models and how we're kind of getting over that. So right now, no one in their right mind would run a large language model to run time series 5-6 year forecasts for a large business with all of the complexities and dependencies that happen in business, all of the variables that are there. So instead, you're stuck in your spreadsheets, you're building a best case, a worst case, and a middle case, and the reality is none of those cases are correct. Our thesis instead is let's capture every single variable, every single possible permutation to run in a decision tree-like architecture, multiple what-if scenarios, all in real time, and then run financial calculations through every single possible permutation of that model. That then generates a shit ton of data. We're using AI and large language models to parse through all that information, then give you AI insights into those calculations and the ability to run derivative calculations on top of that. Long term, we're also using large language models and artificial intelligence and ML to actually help you build these models all in real time, to be able to run through all of the context that are in that models, to use it as part of a recommendation engine in an agent-like experience, to then be able to ask questions of your model. Just picture Jarvis in Iron Man and being able to say, what if I do this and what if I do that? That's the plan with our technology. I'm going to run through two videos here. One's going to be the long one, one's going to be the short one. So depending on which one you're watching, you can watch over and flip over to the other one if you want to. So what we have here. Whatifi is a highly visual node-based connect the dots type software. This is inspired by technology that I'm used to from the film and television and the visual effects industry. Each of these nodes represents business logic. So in our library of nodes, we have things like decisions, contracts, debit, credit, banks, loans, expenses. In our customer module, we have things like customers and growth and churn. What if I spend 50 grand a month on Facebook ads to drive people to my website? What if my conversion rate is A or B? Average order values for e-commerce, things like this. In our capacity planning module, I allow you to keep track of how many employees you have, what projects you've landed. We tie into things like HubSpot, eventually Salesforce to pull deals into your software. How much resources do I need to actually be able to pull off those projects? How much have I used up so far? What's my remaining capacity? And we have a series of utility events that allow you to perform transformations and updates to that data. By connecting these Lego block-like things together, you can build out these financial models. For example, this is a capacity model. How many artists do I have in my various locations? How much revenue is associated with that? How many resources are going to be required for each of those projects? How much have I used up to date? And then I can run different scenarios saying, what if I get all of the award? What if I get some of the award? What if projects are delayed? Every single unique path through this canvas represents an individual scenario. So in this very simple model right now, I have 4 different scenarios. And each of these is a different version of the multiverse, right? But we're calculating all versions of the multiverse all at the same time. So for example, if I turn these on and I pop up my fancy graph, I can see all 4 cash flow models here, for example, all at the same time. Or I can choose to pop up different types of information. Maybe I'm looking at income, maybe I'm looking at capacity, maybe in this particular example I'm looking at resources needed. I can even drill down into specific projects and bubble all of this up so I can see what my income looks like in every single one of these models. I can see what my capacity looks like, where I'm going to be short, resources that are needed. All of that's kind of graphing out in real time. Pretty cool, right? But what that ends up doing is ends up generating a lot of data. So for example, if I look at here, I've got 4 different models, and even as something as simple as this, and if I export this out to a CSV file, for example, and let's pop this up. Yes, it's going to open the numbers, right? Here I can sort of see all of the data that I'm generating and all of the information I'm generating over time, right? All the sort of ledger data. Okay. Ultimately, what we're going to do here in this video is I'm going to show you how we build models, but then I'm also going to show you how we use AI to be able to spark up a conversation and ask questions of this model at the same time as well, okay? But first, let's kind of show you how we actually build a model in Whatifi. So I'm going to create a new scenario here, for example. I'm going to build it from scratch. We're going to call this foo. It's got a start date of January 1st. I'm just going to kind of create this model here. And there's my root, okay? I'm going to pull this over here. I'm going to hide a few things, all right? So the first thing I can do, for example, is I can kind of go and add in maybe an income, really kind of common. So I can add an income. I can give it, so this is income 1. Make it monthly. Maybe it's $50,000 a month. And this revenue starts in April here, runs in perpetuity. And I have a ledger system inside of here as well. I'm just going to put this under my main income. I'm going to keep it simple. So if I add this to the canvas, and if I choose to render this, goes off to AWS, comes back again, and now I can see my $50,000 a month in my cash flow, and I can pop up other ledgers like my income to see my income. All right. Really what the algorithm does is it runs through every single one of these nodes day by day by day and renders out these sort of financial calculations. We can add a second revenue stream in here. So I'm going to duplicate this one. Let's call this income 2 here. And maybe this one is $120,000. And this is actually amortized. All right, so this is something that's going to start in July. And it's going to run for 3 months. And maybe even just to do something more here, I'm going to create a ledger. And I'm going to call this Rev2. Drop that into this separate bucket here. And I'm going to say update. And now when I recalculate, we should see 2 calculations in here combined. My monthly income plus that amortized income that's in the model. Right? Cool. Of course, expenses. So I can go and throw an expense in here right now, and I can have something like this, and we'll just kind of call this expense 1. And maybe this is something that is quarterly, and it's $2,500, and it starts in February, right? So I can add this into my model. I can even drop it into a sub account like an OPEX or something like this. Create this, run the model. And now I'm going to have my cash flow. I'm going to have my income. And if I need to, I can even pop up my expenses here, bring my expenses in the model, and I can see both of those here at the same time. And I can see those kind of playing out all at the same time here too. Okay, so really that's the basics of how the software works. You connect these together much like a regular sort of financial model to run calculations, right? But then you can also kind of create what-if scenarios at any particular stage. So maybe there's different expenses here, or maybe there's a different version of the future. I'm going to add a decision event in, drop this onto my canvas, right? And I'm going to take this expense, I'm going to copy it, I'm going to paste it, drop this down here, and let's make this something more. So this is actually now $25,000. It starts on March the 1st instead, runs in perpetuity, drop this in, do a simulation. Right. And now I'm going to get 2 different scenarios here at the same time. 2 different set of expenses. I've got my income, and now I've got different cash flow in both of those models, monthly or cumulatively. You can graph this data out. You can look at it in a grid view. It's all available to you here, and you can drill down and find out any of this information that you want to inside of the architecture. Super basic, but that's the core concept on how you can kind of connect these models. Now they can get much more complicated, right? So we can kind of get into things like customers and growth and churn and cohorts. So let's just pretend here we have a customer cohort. We'll call this cohort 1. And let's say that there are 400 customers in this cohort effective the 1st. Okay, so I'm just going to submit that. Drop that in. I've kind of created that. I'm going to do a thing here called a branch and connect these 2 threads back together, and now when I run this, I have that in both of my threads. Okay, this is also very, very interactive. So at any particular stage, someone could come along and say, well, I just want to take that expense out of that one particular scenario. You can bypass any of these calculations, re-render the model, see what calculations you get, turn them back on again, and put them back into the model. So we established some customers here. So now if I look at my customers, I can see cumulatively that I've got my 400 customers every month here in my model. Right? I could go in here now and I could add in something like a customer growth if I want to, and say that I want to take customer cohort number 1, and we want to have growth here, and this is growing at 5% month over month. I can submit that, resimulate, and now we're going to start seeing that our customer counts are growing over time. I'm going to drill in here. Here's my customer cohort, and there's my customer cohort, and now I'm starting to kind of get growth every month. Okay. I could throw in other things here like churn. I could have website visitors. I have campaign events, all of that inside of the model here. let's just throw something in like customer churn. We're going to call this churn 1. And I'm going to be churning that same customer cohort, and maybe we're churning out 1.5% a month. Throw that in, and we keep track of that calculation at the same time too. All right. Let's throw in some pricing. So I'm going to use what's called a unit cost event in here, and I'm going to say that we have product number 1. It is monthly, and it's $35 a month. Going to add this in. And then I'm going to add in a revenue event that allows me to calculate these two calculations here at the same time too. So I'm going to use revenue, add this in. I'm going to take my customer cohort, I'm going to take my product, I'm going to call this rev subscription, and I'm going to drop that into yet another ledger here, and I'm going to call this subscription revenue. All right, lots of spelling mistakes, we'll get over it. Boom, dropping that in, and submit. And now I've also created a third income stream in my model. Dropping this in, resimulate, and now if I look at my income, I said I should have lots of income. I can barrel inside of my income, and I can choose to pull out those individual calculations and make them all available to me here. And I can see my subscription revenue month over month, my regular revenue, all of that kind of combined to generate my cash flow. With me so far? Cool. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to a more complicated model. I'm going to show you how we're using artificial intelligence to parse through some of this data. All right, cool. So here's that model that I showed you earlier. It's much more complicated. I come from the film and television industry, so this is kind of inspired by that. This software is built to be niche agnostic. So as we add more and more nodes to the software, it can be used to do anything that's financial, operational, numerical. It doesn't really matter. Let's kind of run through this model in a little bit more detail, okay? So one, you can pull out any drivers, you can edit them up here, so you don't always have to be in the nodes. And in a relatively soon version of the software, there will be a dashboard here instead, so you're not always having to deal directly with the nodes. But here, for example, I'm establishing how many artists I have in Vancouver, right? I can give them an amount, I can give them a salary, I can give them accounts, start dates, end dates, and I'm establishing the number of artists that I have in all 3 locations, okay? I've got my deals, so I can look at all the different projects that I have. Here I have an episodic television series. I got a big feature film that's potentially awarded. I have another big feature film that is awarded. I can keep track of all of that information. I can look at my dollar value of all of these awards in these scenarios. I can go into any particular project and any particular resource. I can look at that resource and give it hours or days of work that are required. I can animate the distribution of that work over time, so you can see when you actually need the resources in those models to be able to run these resources needed calculations. So here you can see the shape of the work, how many people you're going to need to be able to pull this work off in all these different versions of the model, okay? Et cetera, running all the way through. So the challenge now becomes, as I mentioned before, is there is a lot of data here to take a look at. So what we've done right now is we have created a model that allows us to have a new conversation. And I can call this capacity questions. All right. And here I'm going to ask, let me see. In these 4 threads, comma, please identify any capacity concerns per artist type. And here we get our answers, right? In the 4 threads analyzed, there are capacity concerns for different artist types, how many animators, compositors, general artists that are kind of required here, right? So I can ask some follow-up questions. In scenario thread 5, am I ever understaffed in compositors? Great, period. Am I ever understaffed in any of the other artist roles? And here you can see that I'm not understaffed in any compositors. It's going through all of the ledger data and pulling out those insights for you. All right, so here it's identifying that I'm short animators in this one particular scenario. On average, how many animators should I hire to fill the staffing gap and when should they start and end? So here I get a sense of how many people I need to hire, gaps, starting dates in this deficit to be able to sort of fill out this particular plan. Again, still early days and we have work to do to make it as reliable as possible, but you can see the basics that are here. Other things. Analyze all 4 scenario threads and tell me which one is the most profitable. And here it's able to analyze our highest cumulative values, and we can see what those look like over time. And if I look at my cumulative values, you can see it's lining up with our thread number 1 here, our first sort of thread in our scenario. Anyway, that's just sort of a highlight of the basics of what we're able to do with AI insights. Where we're headed next, right? Every single one of these events has a schema. So here's the problem right now. If I was to kind of go and show you an output for one of these models, right? How many artists I need, or how much revenue I had, or what a profit margin was in a particular scenario. And then I was to ask you why. Why is that the case? In most of these outputs, you don't actually have access to the what and the when that generated the outcomes. But because in our model, we have access to every single one of these nodes. And every single one of these nodes tells me how many resources I needed, all the metadata and context that's available to us. Or if I look at a utilization node, how many hours we've used up of a particular resource. Or if I look at a income revenue node, how much we're making, when we're starting to make it, how long they run for, which sort of ledgers they are. We have access to a bucket load of metadata. And the idea here is also being able to pass that same information through to the large language model, put it in a format that it can understand. So when you start to ask questions, not just of what the outputs are, but why they are, you'd have access to that information. It's kind of meant to be no different than when you're walking into a boardroom and the CEO asks you a question about why something is, and then normally you'd have to say is, that's a great question, let me get back to you, and you have to go and ask somebody, and that person has to ask somebody, or you have to run through a series of spreadsheets to find the source. We're tying all that stuff together. The big piece here is being real-time. So we have our first integration in place. We have HubSpot. So I'm able to pull in real-time data from HubSpot to see what some of these projects look like. When things change, those update. We're working on our QuickBooks integration right now. We have a whole series of integrations to be able to pull this information in. And then so long-term, what's the mission? We want to turn all of this into an agentic experience. Being able to train financial models and strategic models on different industries, all the domain knowledge that goes along with it, and then give users just a purely conversational way of interacting with that data. So you'd be able to ask questions of the model here. You'd be able to tie into and resync information from whatever third-party source that you want to. You'd be able to kind of pop up and take a look at data that's inside of any of these particular buckets here. So if you had a customer count or products or whatever it is, you'd be able to change those values. You'd be able to keep track of all your different threads here and decide which ones you want to be viewing on the graph and not. And then being able to just ask questions of the model and immediately get those insights. But then if you need to drill deeper in, you can drill deeper in and actually get into the model itself and to be able to look through that model. So what have we done here? We have built a financial model using these pre-built business logic events. We are using large language models to have a natural language conversation with the model and to parse through bucket loads of details there. And then we're able to ask questions of the model and get insights. We're able to compare threads and ask for what's better in each of these particular scenarios. And ultimately, we're trying to create a co-pilot-like experience that allows you to ask and answer questions in real time. So what's my ask? We're in our early adopter phase right now. We built something really, really cool, but we need to get more people using it. We've raised a little bit of capital. We put our fundraising on pause, and now we're getting back into motion with that one. So if there's anyone who's interested in investing in the space, happy to talk. But most importantly, we're looking for design partners. I'd love to get 15 different design partners across 3 different avenues to help understand our node-based architecture and also start to smash test our artificial intelligence integration. I'm looking for companies in the software as a service space that have complex customer growth sort of modules and pricing. I'm looking for companies that have project-based plans. What if I land this project? What if I land that project? Large price values and a lot of capacity that's involved in that one. And I'm looking for companies that are trying to do straight-out FP&A, P&L type of calculations, revenue, EBITDA, those sort of things, to be able to run scenario projections on that. If you're interested, reach out, and I'm happy to talk some more, and I look forward to your questions. Thanks.